And so recently I've really been in the mood for just reading a lot of different kind of books set in a lot of different kind of locations, and I really like short books because it allows me to like kind of enter a new story every day and to experience a new world every day. And I feel like after the past few weeks where I've been reading a lot of short books, so many new characters have entered my head, I've been in so many different places and that's a lot of fun. Part of the joy of reading is getting to travel while sitting on the sofa. So I want to start with The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. This was originally a novel but then got adapted into a play, and I read the play version. Well, I actually listened to it on audio book, and it was read by Vanessa Redgrave, who also performed the stage version, I believe, because she's on the front cover. And this book is primarily about grief. It is autobiographical, so it's about Joan and how she dealt with the death of her husband, and also at the same time her husband died, her daughter was in the ICU, so that was a very challenging time for her. And the story starts out with the death of Joan's husband, and it feels like such a normal event, and I suppose death, even though it feels abnormal, is quite a normal thing because everyone goes through it. Everyone in all likelihood has experienced grief of some kind, and I thought she did a really good job of kind of showing the normality of death but also the abnormality of it, and kind of working with that juxtaposition. And I thought this was so well done and very heart-wrenching. And it's only like an hour and a bit long, the play version, free to read on Audible, so very good.
This happened on December 30th, 2003. That may seem a while ago, but it won't when it happens to you. And it will happen to you. The details will be different, but it will happen to you. That's what I'm here to tell you.
Next, I read The Cockroach by Ian McEwan. Ian McEwan is one of my favourite writers. My favourite book by him is Atonement. I also like Amsterdam and Black Dogs and On Chesil Beach. And this book is loosely based on Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis. It's about a man who turns into a cockroach. And in this book, it's about a man who turns into a cockroach, but it's significant because that man is a politician. So you can see what metaphor is going on there. And I should have suspected that this wouldn't be my favourite Ian McEwan book because it is a political novel, and I think political novels aren't always my cup of tea, and that's probably true for this book too. There is a political idea in this novel called reversalism, which is about reversing the flow of money, and its point is that it is absurd because it is a satirical book. And to try and explain reversalism to you, it is like the idea of money going backwards. So there is one point in the novel where a man is concerned that he won't be able to afford his job, and then someone suggests he buys a Tesla. So it doesn't make sense. I couldn't get my head around it, but I think that was the point. It was meant to be absurd. And I suppose the point of satire is to make the ideas bloated and to make them unrealistic because you are being satirical. But I suppose for me, my personal favourite stories are those about human beings, and they are often written in realistic ways, which Ian McEwan usually writes like that. He really looks at the human condition and like in a realistic setting. But this wasn't that. It was very much sort of just a bit absurdist. I also think the metaphor of the cockroach didn't really have much power beyond its metaphorical value. At the beginning, it is noteworthy that the politician turns into a cockroach, but I think as the story goes on, it doesn't really matter that much that he's a cockroach. So like the main title of the book is Cockroach, but I didn't think that had much prevalence in the story.
That morning, Jim Sams, clever but by no means profound, woke from uneasy dreams to find himself transformed into a giant creature.
I also read Western Lane by Chetna Maroo. This was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and I can definitely see why. It is quite a quiet story about family and grief, and also squash. And I think the topic of squash is partly why it gained award recognition, because there are a lot of books about grief, but this book kind of did something a bit new in that it took something as kind of niche as squash and used it to explore the topic of grief. So one of the main themes of the book is looking at how sport, or squash, can be used to make grief easier to deal with. And I really enjoyed this one. I can't say it will stay with me as much as other books that I've read this year, but I did enjoy it.
In the court, your mind is not only on the shot you're about to play, and the shot with which your opponent might reply, but on the shots that will follow. It happens so quickly that it feels like instinct. Sometimes you don't even know that you are thinking.
I also read Sleeper in the Spindle by Neil Gaiman and illustrated by Chris Riddell. And this book is a Sleeping Beauty retelling, but instead of a prince coming to save Sleeping Beauty is saved by Snow White. And I quite like the mixture of those two fairy tales. The novel, it's not really a novel, I suppose it's more of a novella. The novella is written in a very fantastic fairy tale like way, I suppose is the way to describe it. And I think what is quite nice about fairy tales is they're quite accessible because they're written in a way that really pulls you into the story and doesn't disguise the story. Like, it's very clear what is going on. Sometimes it's nice to read a book where you really have to work to figure out what's going on, but this book isn't like that. It's it's a book that very much takes you under its wing and is very easy to fall into. And I was craving a bit of fantasy, but I didn't want to commit to like a 600-page novel. I have Way of Kings on my audiobook app, which is like 45 hours long, and I really want to listen to it, but I haven't been able to commit to it yet. So it was quite nice to get a little taste of fantasy to satisfy my craving.
Learning how to be strong, to feel her own emotions and not another's, had been hard. But once you learned the trick of it, you did not forget.
And I also read 1984 by George Orwell. This was a reread for me, but I haven't read it since I was at school. And I really enjoyed it at school, and I enjoyed it maybe even more now. I think it is one of the best books ever written. I think it's particularly impressive because the novel was written, I believe, at the end of the 1940s, and it's so relevant to today. And I also think it has such an important message at its heart. It is about the dangers of totalitarian regimes. It's about the dangers of not having freedom and not having freedom of expression, and about how awful it can be to have to conform yourself to someone else's desire of what you should be. And I listened to it on Audible, which has a live cast recording, and I thought this was fantastic. It felt almost like a theatre play, except I could create the stage design in my head, and I thought there were so many scenes that really captured the tension. I thought the best scene in the audiobook was between O'Brien and Winston Smith and Julia when they're in O'Brien's living room, and it felt so intense because you're so hoping that O'Brien is going to help them and be on their side, but of course I knew what the eventual outcome would be, and it made me sit up in my chair and like have my mouth agape because I just think it was so well written and acted within the audiobook.
Power is in tearing human minds to pieces and putting them together again in new shapes of your own choosing.
And another book I read is Swimming in the Dark by Tomasz Jedrowski. I hope I'm saying that right. And this is set in Poland in the 1980s, during the decline of communism. I was particularly interested in reading this because I lived in Warsaw for a year, and I haven't read very many books set in Poland at all. And I really liked how this book is a human story, but it also educates you on the history of Poland too. And it is really a love story at its heart and a human story at its heart. I really love the narrative voice. I think that was the stand out for me. I got very attached to the protagonist, Ludwig, and really felt like with him on his journey. And I think if you're looking for a book that looks at like realistic relationships and that has a protagonist that you can really grow to understand and grow to connect to, and also that has LGBT themes like this book does, then this book is definitely worth giving a go.
No matter what happens in the world, however brutal or dystopian a thing, not all is lost if there are people out there risking themselves to document it. Little sparks cause fires too.